Thank you. Well, yes, my name is Aaron Likens. I serve as the Autism Ambassador at Easter Seals National. Also, as mentioned, author of the book Finding Kansas, was able to write from a first-hand account. And one thing about this presentation, I was really torn on which. I have two different PowerPoint presentations. One is this law enforcement one. Another is primarily for teachers and educators, which I felt this one being such a diverse group of different representation. This is the presentation that I give law enforcement all the way up to the FBI. So going with this one, the stories I'll try to change, make it more of an education setting, but the wordage will be for first responders. But first thing I do have to start off with was I am on the autism spectrum, and the first and most important thing anybody and everybody needs to know about autism is that if you've met one person with autism, you've only met one person with autism. Next person you come across with the same diagnosis as myself, public speaking may not be their area of expertise. In fact, somebody may have done something awful to them, and their ability to say one word in response, help or yes or no, may not be there. So throughout this presentation, just keep in mind, just because I give a story one way, next person you come across, same diagnosis, could be opposite. Again, I did say this is for law enforcement, so I just started off really basic. That what is autism? Well, it's a neurologically based developmental disability that seriously affects a person's ability to communicate, socialize, and make judgments. First and foremost, autism is going to be a communication thing, and for those on the more severe end, you're going to have individuals nonverbal, and the only way they may be able to communicate is through behavior. Case in point, a decade ago here in California, there was a 18-year-old, more moderate to severe autism, nonverbal. He never had any behaviors, though, any bad behaviors. He wasn't aggressive, he wasn't violent. One weekend, bam, severe behaviors. Attacked his parents, destroyed the room, and these behaviors went on and on and on, and nobody could make sense of it. It was so atypical of him. Family hired a behavior analyst, and the analyst came in and noted every single behavior the kid did all day long, and the only anomaly was about 2 times a day, the kid would put his hand up to his mouth just like so, maybe just for a second or two. On a Hail Mary pass, the analyst said, I don't know, take him to the dentist. Well, they took him to the dentist, and they found out he had an abscessed tooth, which was so infected it was pushing up into the sinus cavity. That happened to any of you. You could have said long before it got to that point, hey, doc, Kate, dentist, this is hurting. For somebody on the autism spectrum, they may not have those words or means to communicate it outside of their behavior. If communication is hard, so too is socializing. You're going to see that with us with Asperger's. We are going to be in the workplace, in school, have families, and sometimes we are going to be experts at saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. Some personal examples later on. Also making judgments, another one of the unfortunate aspects of autism, examples of that also forthcoming. Autism may also affect the person's sensory responses to even normal levels of light, sounds, touches, odors, and tastes. This is one thing that, unless you have sensory issues, it's very hard to relate to. It's something most people don't even consider, but let's say we had a person in a sensory crisis outside. Maybe the wind was too loud. You may think that if we emptied this room, this would be a nice, quiet environment for somebody to de-escalate. Not necessarily the case. The noise of the air conditioning, that constant hum, the sound of the technology, the sound of the breakfast burners, just that background noise, for some people with autism, it's going to be too much. In an education setting, think about your elementary school, 20, 25 students, a lot of just whispering during class, maybe somebody tapping that could be too much. The number of those that do have sensory issues, 80% of those on the spectrum will have a sensory issue in one form or another. Primarily what you are going to see are light, sounds, and touches. When it comes to lights, this is something that until I talked to people that were on the more moderate side of autism, I never considered, but fluorescent lights, some individuals will see the gases flowing through the tubes or hear the gases flowing through the tubes. So in your office settings, if you've ever been in an office that had that one, or classroom that had that one fluorescent light that was just slightly out of balance, that was just flickering, for some people with autism, every single light, no matter what, will look like that. As I said, most will be light sounds, touches. The way odors and tastes are going to come about in any law enforcement or other individuals' work, don't really know, but there can be issues here. Autism is typically observed by age 3 and is more common in males than females. That's about a 4.5 to 1 ratio, so it's much more prevalent in boys than girls. It is not caused by the way parents raise their children. And we have to say that because when autism was first being diagnosed in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, doctors had a most unfortunate way of going about giving the diagnosis. They would tell the parents, yes, your child has autism, there is no hope for them, you might as well put them in an institution, and oh, by the way, it's your fault. Parents were the original thought of cause of autism, specifically the mother, specifically if she fed them TV dinners because that somehow showed a lack of bonding or something. I don't know. Thankfully, we have come a long ways, and we now know that no amount of good or bad parenting or TV dinners or lack thereof can cause or prevent autism, but despite all the ongoing research, there is no known cause and there is no known cure. If you do look up autism cause on the all-knowing internet, you will find 20,000 things that are linked to autism, and if you do more research, you'll find 40,000 things that say those other 20,000 things don't know what they're talking about. Bottom line, it remains a big mystery. More research is looking towards the genetic component, but then how you can have identical twins and one has it, one not, remains a big mystery, and because of that, there is no cure. When it comes to autism, it isn't a brain chemistry thing, it's a brain wiring thing. You can't just throw medicine at it. Yeah, medicine can work on maybe some of the other symptoms, anxiety, depression, very common for those on the autism spectrum, but there is no pill that's going to make somebody go from nonverbal to verbal or sensory issues to not. Hopefully tomorrow we have a lot more answers than we do today, but right now it remains a gigantic mystery. So before I rattle off the statistics, how many here know somebody or know somebody that knows somebody on the autism spectrum? Show of hands, and just about everybody. That's, I'll say, when I began as a presenter back in January 2010, I started presenting at the St. Louis Police Academy. And when I asked that question, if I got a quarter of the room to raise their hand, that was a big number. Now, no matter where I am, even if it's a kindergarten, which I gotta tell you, I've presented to some pretty intimidating crowds, nothing compares to a kindergarten class. That, I think I have one of those coming up next month. But even them, 3/4 of the room now raise their hand. There is a reason for that. I was born back in 1983. Autism back then, relatively unheard of. We were at 1 in 1,500. Then in 1997, the numbers ballooned to 1 in 500. When I began presenting, it was 1 in 155. Most current numbers released, 5 months to 3 weeks ago. Not to be precise or anything. Another thing about us on the autism spectrum, we can be overly precise when we don't need to be. Just go with it. Thank you. You're welcome. But anyway, 5 months, 3 weeks ago, the CDC released the newest numbers. For those under the age of 21, the current rate is 1 in 59. 1 in 59 under the age of 21 now in America will be on the autism spectrum, which means in terms of a law enforcement setting, if all calls were evenly spread across society, which they aren't, but if they were spread across society, that means you're looking at roughly 2% of every police interaction with somebody under the age of 21 is going to involve autism in one way or another. And in some states, it's much more prevalent in 1 in 59. I know South Korea, this was back in 2011, they said their numbers were 1 in 38. So it transcends political lines, geographical lines, financial lines. It's something that affects the society evenly. So, common reasons why a person with autism may unfortunately come into contact with officials or police. A person displays unusual behavior in community setting where they are not known. For those that don't know what autism looks like, it can look kind of odd. And I hate referencing the movie Rain Man, but unfortunately for a lot of people in society, that is their only frame of reference of what autism may look like. But you may have somebody have that type of behavior. You may have somebody, maybe they're a bit nervous, maybe they're happy, whatever it may be. They may be on the street corner, rocking back and forth, saying the same thing over and over and over, and somebody may be passing by them, going to the store. They think nothing of it, but 30 minutes later when they're walking back home and that person is in the same spot exhibiting the same behaviors, well, that person may come to the conclusion that that person's on something. Maybe that person's disturbed. Maybe that person may need help. That could potentially result in a call. Parents also may have the police called on them. And these types of stories are going down because awareness is going up. But in 2000, there was a father in southern Florida. They were leaving a shopping mall. He had a 5-year-old son with autism. And conveniently placed right by the exit was the cookie store. Well, they were going to dinner, so the cookie would spoil dinner, so there would be no cookie. Well, the 5-year-old, his solution to that problem was he threw a tantrum. He threw himself on the floor, started kicking and screaming. And, well, parents have received therapy, have received help and how to maybe curb those behaviors, are taught if you want to get rid of the behavior, actively ignore it. Sometimes you have to wait them out a long time. Well, the dad's keeping the corner of his eye on this kid to make sure he isn't going to hurt himself or somebody else. But this goes on for about 20 minutes. Other people in the area are looking at what they assume is the most neglectful father in the world because there's his kid and the dad's just off to the side. So the police were called. They came out and, as I said, autism awareness, unheard of. So the police then called Children's Division. Children's Division came out. And it ended up with that father giving them a 90-minute crash course of autism in the parking lot. Those type of calls are going down. One thing, if you ever go into the social work or police field, some families will utilize the autism handout card. If there is a behavior like that in public, we'll hand it out to people just in the vicinity just to explain this is autism, this is normal, give us room. We know what we're doing, something along those lines. Person may also rearrange or make order out of store displays or products, may appear shoplifting, or if you saw the television series Monk, some individuals will experience severe OCD-like tendencies, so several stories here. One, let's start with the rearranging or making order out of store displays. See this a lot with teenagers with Asperger's. You go into a grocery store, you go down the cereal aisle, and there is one major problem. It's not alphabetized. So they will take it upon themselves to walk down the middle of the aisle, just knocking everything on the floor. And let's go back to the beginning where I said making judgments. Because at that moment in time, in the mind of the person with Asperger's, that store manager is going to throw a ticker tape parade in his honor because he is bringing order out of what was chaos. Well, when the manager sees so many boxes of cereal on the floor, he isn't exactly going to be thrilled. May result in a call, may not, but what will usually draw the ire of society? Shoplifting. When I think of shoplifting, I think if I were going to take something, I'd do everything I could to conceal what it is that I just took. A person with autism may be more than willing to waive what they took, show the entire world. A perfect example, in Olivet, Missouri, which is a suburb just west of town of St. Louis City, there's a pharmacy, and in the front of the store they have a television that they're playing promo ads for things that are on sale, and on top of that television is a black shiny remote controller. This man in his 50s, very ritualistic in his behavior. He walks into this pharmacy every single day, walks down the aisles. He never buys anything, but he loves looking at the prices. He loves looking at the colors, and as he's leaving the store, his eyes are drawn to this awesomely sleek, cool black controller. He picks it up. He becomes engrossed, enthralled, or any other superlative adjective you want to use, and he leaves the store waving it for all the world to see. Well, there have been several dozen calls to the police about theft of the remote controller, which now the police no longer talk to the man with autism. They talk to the store manager. The only thing the man takes is the remote controller. All the manager has to do is hide the controller, and this story goes away. But at last check, 7 years later, the epic battle of the remote controller is still going on to this day. And it's like, dude, hide the controller and everything's fine. But another thing, this really doesn't have to do with shoplifting, but is sort of in the same realm. There is a school district in St. Louis, and the 6th grader hacked into the school's network. Now, this sounds like something nefarious is up, changing grades, changing attendance. Oh, that's not what he did. No. What he did was he changed the school district's payroll service because he found a better deal and he saved him $1,000. Now, what he didn't realize was that, vacation time, savings, all that stuff got lost, but he thought he was just helping out. And the FBI was called in on that one because they thought it was something up to no good, but that 6th grader had no idea that one, that's not his place. Two, if he did find a better deal, maybe he should have told somebody. And three, you don't hack into the school's network. So everybody just agreed that he lost computer privileges for 6 months. And I'm sure now he's going to be a great computer scientist somewhere. And hopefully he uses his stuff for good and not changing payroll services. Also, the person may display escalated behavior in the community, at school, or at home. I could give you 8 hours of random stories that go nowhere on this. One thing I will cover is school. Let's take kindergarten. In kindergarten, if you really think about it, it's a scary place. You have 20, 25 other kids you don't really know running around screaming randomly. You have adults you've never met telling you what to do, and you have to comply. And oh, it's scary if you're not on the autism spectrum. Throw in a mix of autism and it becomes, well, all the more frantic. Unfortunately, a kindergartner on the spectrum may learn that when they hit another kid, they get to go to the nice, quiet, dimly lit office and do their work in peace. That's not a punishment. That is the grandest of all grand rewards. First grade, second grade, fourth grade, sixth grade. That behavior gets reinforced. When things get hectic, act up, get a reward. These individuals, they may not be realizing that they are going to grow up. They may actually be able to harm another individual. All they know is that when things get hectic, if they have a sensory issue, act up, get rewarded. Recognizing someone with autism, maybe nonverbal, easy for you to understand, they can't talk. Difficult thing is for those that have limited speech. Prime example of that, in upstate New York in 2005, there was a high school student. He was an excellent swimmer. He loved to swim. He would spend all summer at the swimming pool. It was an exceptionally hot day this one day, though, and he became dehydrated to the point that he cramped up. So he shouted to the lifeguard, "All done, pull plug." Lifeguard did nothing. Well, eventually the person cramped up to the point that went under. The lifeguard did have to go in and get him out, and here's what had happened. When this teenager was really young and his dad would give him a bath, when he was done with the bath, he would tell his dad, "All done, pull plug." That's saying everything you need to say in as little words as possible. Well, unfortunate for that lifeguard and unfortunate for society. We on the autism spectrum, we sort of operate under the system of I think, therefore you should know. Which this is going to be something, if you have any interaction with somebody with autism, you are going to come across, because if I know it, you already know it. So we are experts at starting stories, like in Act 2. I'm not giving you the back story, because if I know it, you already know it. Which in the story meant, since that kid's dad knew what he was talking about, that meant everybody in society would have the exact same comprehension. So be prepared for that. So if you get those sentence fragments or referencing the story that happened previously, there's going to be no way that you're going to be able to know what they're talking about. And in their mind, they're not going to understand why you aren't comprehending what they're saying, because since their family member or teacher they had 5 years ago or whomever, since that person knows it, in our mind, everybody's going to have that same comprehension. Avoiding eye contact, extremely common for us on the autism spectrum. That doesn't mean everybody. I saw a misguided expert on the news in July 2016 proclaim that, yes, if a person with autism makes eye contact, that disqualifies them from an autism diagnosis. I wanted to throw my controller at the television, but that is not a healthy way of going about things, and that's also very expensive. So I wrote a blog post instead, much more constructive. But you may see that. You may see individuals make inappropriate amounts of eye contact, as if they're always in the midst of a stare-down championship tournament. But for the most part, you're going to see us shy away from it. For me, several reasons why. One, I learned at a young age that random eye contact initiates a random conversation. Random conversations are hard, therefore eye contact is difficult. Furthermore, I'm not a good judge at reading facial expressions. I'm going to have absolutely no idea if you're happy, sad, mad, or if I am absolutely boring you to tears. Going to have no idea. However, I'm still receiving the signals. I'm registering. Okay, that was a head nod. That was a head tilt. Wait, was that a head tilt? Wait, was that a laugh, like a real laugh, like a ha ha ha? Or was that a fake laugh, like a I'm going to be receiving all this information. It's information overload. I'm going to get an anxiety response. My heart rate is going to go through the roof. I'm going to get a surge of adrenaline, and it's going to start feeling like I'm being stabbed by 10,000 needles in my legs. not a pleasant feeling. So naturally, I'm going to tend to shy away from it. Other individuals may get that same anxiety response just at short spurts. I'm good at faking eye contact. Others may not. And I know my third grade teacher, which I was not diagnosed at the time, had the mentality of look at me when I talk to you. I don't think I heard half the stuff she said. That anxiety of eye contact, I really lose the ability to process what I'm hearing. So a lot of us with autism, when we avoid eye contact, we're actually trying to respect you so we can hear what you are saying. Preferring to be alone? Well, yes. If eye contact is hard, if communication is hard, we are going to prefer to be alone. That's unfortunate for especially law enforcement, because if they're introduced into their environment, they may be in line for a very stiff initial resistance. Go back to that hitting people in kindergarten story of being alone. Other people may have learned that when they just scream uncontrollably or laugh hysterically, people just sort of wander away. So there may be, each person may have his or her own way to keep the isolation, but might have to be there a while before they realize their typical tactics are going to be ineffective. Here is the unfortunate aspect of autism: lack fear of real danger. And one thing, you probably know this, I have to cover this, especially with law enforcement though, because so often in society we judge intelligence by how well one speaks, how many syllables a person uses in an average paragraph. Well, just because somebody's nonverbal, that's not a sign of a lack of intelligence. There are people that are nonverbal with genius level IQs. So just because somebody's nonverbal, not a sign of a lack of intelligence. I used to work for Easter Seals Midwest in St. Louis, and we did therapies for individuals of all ages. Nobody aged out of our programs. And sometimes though, a kid would get it in their mind that when their parents or guardian would drop them off on a given day, well, that person didn't want to be there. So their solution was to just start running. They didn't know where they were running to. All they knew is what they were running away from. So imagine running full speed looking backwards. Eventually you're going to come into contact with something. We did have individuals end up on this 4-lane road, speed limit 45 miles an hour. Thankfully, we never had anybody get hit, but other autism agencies or law enforcement agencies, when people were trying to get away from something, have had individuals get injured or worse. This next story was a national news story in February of 2010. This 11-year-old, which she was several grades ahead, she had Asperger's, she was in high school, and she needed a picture of a certain type of flower for a high school project. Sure, she could have printed it off online, but in her mind that would be cheating. She wanted the real thing. So after school, she got on her bicycle, she rode several miles away, went into the woods, and this flower grows in woods, but she was having no luck. So she got to the edge of these swamplands, and this flower grows supposedly in abundance in the swamp, so she figured she'd just go out a little bit and find it. So she's going into the swamp knee deep, having no luck. Couple hours go by. She figures, okay, just one more bend in the swamp and I'm going to find it. And now she's holding the camera above her head, mud and water chest deep, and she was oblivious to the fact that she quite literally was becoming stuck in the mud. A volunteer, thankfully, about 24, 30 hours later, found her, and he was in a boat. And when the national news media got a hold of this story, they made that volunteer a villain. Because surely that couldn't be the way the story actually happened. Who would willingly go into a swamp and get themselves stuck? But that's exactly what had happened. Now, law enforcement was curious, how did that person know to look in a swamp? Because nobody was looking there, but in this story, it was a fluke because this person was higher functioning, but he knew that if you get a missing persons report, check water sources, because unfortunately, drowning is a leading cause of death for those on the autism spectrum. I presented at a Leeds conference in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the police chief from Fresno was there. And just a week prior, before I gave that presentation, when I was telling that story about Florida, he interrupted me and he said, "Aaron, we had a thing last week. Mom called 911, freaking out, her kid was gone. And in our 911 database, we had it flagged that the person with autism lived there. So the police knew that drowning is a leading cause of death, so they used Google Maps to look up all the swimming pools and other things around the area. They got all the public works departments involved in the search, and a street maintenance person found the person it was only 6 blocks away, but the person was leaning forward just about to get into a swimming pool, and this person couldn't swim. So another minute or two later, the story would have had a tragic ending. So thankfully that knowledge in regard prevented one of those all too common stories. Another thing that's unfortunate that is kind of unfortunate, apparent insensitivity or high tolerance for pain. Many different stories here. One, if you ever go into the social work or investigative field, this can be very confusing. 2 years ago in St. Louis, a mother rushes into the ER. Her 3-year-old daughter had these ring marks on her feet, burn rings, and they were in the pattern of a stovetop, and it was burned to the bone. The nurses see this and they go, "This has to be one of the worst cases of abuse we have ever seen." Police are called. They refer to Children's Division, and the mom's story, which, I mean, she was so adamant, she was crying, she felt horrible about her daughter, but she said, "All I did, I went downstairs to go turn some laundry around, and the washer got out of balance, and I kept doing that. I was only downstairs for 4 minutes, and, well, this 3-year-old, genius level IQ in terms of figuring stuff out, this 3-year-old liked being in high places. So she had moved furniture around to be able to climb up onto the kitchen sink. She walked around and then walked onto the stove that was preheating, and the person liked the feeling of ripples, which older stove would have that, but this 3-year-old did not feel pain. She had no idea that she was being brutally burned. Eventually, all the investigators believed the mom because there were no bruises or restraint marks from they figured, if a 3-year-old was forcibly being held on a stove, there would be this huge fight. There was none. Let's reinforce the no pain story. In 2006 here in California, there was a rollover car accident. And, the parents in the front seat were fine. They had an 18-year-old nonverbal in the middle seat. And the parents didn't want to deal with co-pays or hospitals, so they declined any medical attention whatsoever. Over the next month, though, they noticed that their 18-year-old had this weird twitch when he walked. Now, if you didn't know the kid, you would think that was his normal walk. But it was just kind of out of balance, so eventually they went to their doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh, wait, you rolled your van over, didn't you? Yeah, we're going to do an x-ray. It's probably just muscular. It's been a month, but we're going to do an x-ray." When they did an x-ray, they couldn't believe what they were seeing, because this 18-year-old had been walking on a broken femur for the previous month. The amount of pain that should have been causing would have been beyond excruciating. Yet that person went through it like it wasn't even there. Now, to give you a story that impacted law enforcement directly, this happened in North County in St. Louis in October of 2009. And the thing about this family I'm about to describe, families that are given therapies are taught, if you want your child to grow, get them out in public. Get them out. Don't lock them away in the house. That's what we did in the 50s and 60s. There's no potential to be experienced then. Get them out. Well, this family had received no services. Both parents worked, and I guess this 18-year-old was fine watching television all day, but one afternoon, for some reason, he left the front door, and when the door shut behind him, the doorknob was locked. He locked himself out of the house. So he was trying to get in, and one thing I didn't tell you, one, this isn't the best of neighborhoods in St. Louis. 2, this guy's 6'5", 300 pounds. Neighbors see this, they think burglary in progress. He keeps trying to open the door, and police are called. They come out. They ask, "Sir, what are you doing? What's your name?" Well, 1, this individual's nonverbal. He's not going to respond. 2, his favorite television show is coming on right now. He needs in the house 5 seconds ago. So he's not acknowledging the officers. He keeps trying to open the door. And one of the officers, they come and they just tap him on the shoulder. And unfortunately for that officer, this individual had sensory issues of being touched. He became highly aggressive, highly violent, flung the officer like a rag doll. And at that moment in time, those 2 officers were no match for this 300-pound ball of adrenaline rage. Officers upgraded in their tactics. They went to the taser, and it did absolutely nothing. This is an extremely rare instance across the country, but thankfully those officers had been CIT trained. They realized this was not a traditional case. Something else was going on. Now, whether or not they knew it was autism, don't know, but they backed off. They gave that person space. They made sure he wasn't going to come off the front porch, and Within about 30 seconds, he went right back to the front door. They got more officers on the scene, tracked down the parents, brought the parents there, and thankfully this story didn't escalate to something it very well could have. Unusual responses to light sounds or other sensory input. Myself, I have sensory issues, primarily to drums, low-level bass noise, and in 2006, November of 2006, we had about 3 inches of snow on the ground. I was upstairs, and my stepbrother in the basement started playing the drums. And within about half a second of hearing and feeling that low-level bass noise, I felt the absolute worst pain of my life. And I know my pains. I know them all too well. In 1998, I broke my back racing go-karts. In 2005, I had a MRSA staph infection at the base of my skull. Was in the hospital for a week with 105.4 degree fever. 9 months later, went to Madagascar, got E. coli. That was not good. 2 years, 3 months ago, I got this thing called pleurisy, which the thing about pleurisy, most people haven't heard of it until you've had it. And then once you have it, just the name alone is the stuff nightmares are made out of. So anyway, I know my pains. Nothing can compare to what my body does to me internally when I hear drums. I'm an author. I use words to describe things. I can never describe what that type of sensory issue feels like. When my stepbrother started playing, my conscious turned off. My subconscious took over, and my subconscious's solution to the problem was I just started hitting myself in the head absolutely as hard as I could. Unfortunately, self-injurious behavior is common for us on the autism spectrum. And I think, I've come to the conclusion, I think I was trying to create an external pain that felt better than this internal pain that I was feeling. Unfortunately, I was at that part of insensitivity. I wasn't feeling anything on the outside. So I ran out of the house screaming. I was in shorts and a t-shirt. We had 3 inches of snow on the ground. I ran 2.5 blocks away. And as I got those 2.5 blocks, I finally started feeling again. 1, I realized my feet were really cold. Frostbite's not something to play around with. 2, I realized I had this horrible headache. So as fast as I ran 2.5 blocks, I ran even faster home, opened the front door, walked in, drums were still playing, same reaction. Sensory issues are pattern-based. If they happen one way one time, they are going to continue to happen. So if there is a sensory issue, that person can be restrained all day long, but de-escalation more than likely is not going to happen until they are removed or that sensory element is removed from their environment. On the flip side of that, though, a person may seek sensory stimulation, including heavy pressure. I said I hated drums, but go south of St. Louis to Perryville. There's a mother there. She has 3 daughters. They all have Asperger's, and they are all drummers. So that right there shows you the contrast. But myself, when I present, I wear tight-fitting shoes. I have no idea how it works. It does. This is now my 953rd presentation. Not that I have a detailed Excel spreadsheet or anything on my computer of every presentation I've done. Nor do I have a map of when I was primarily based in Missouri of what county I presented in, by what month, by what year. Okay, I will say stat keeping and autism spectrum, awesome combination. So much fun. Anyway, though, I've been joking for about 7 years now that I wanted to try to give a presentation barefoot, but I have this whole reputation to keep, and if I were barefoot, I'd still be on my opening slide trying to introduce myself, and by this point in time, it'd be awkward for everybody. So be thankful I found the tight-fitting shoes to be effective, but other individuals may wear a weighted vest. That can be a very huge calming mechanism to get them through the day, same as shoes. And in many of the behaviors you may come across, some individuals, if they're walking down a hall, you may see them constantly bang up against the wall. Well, our proprioceptive sense, which they lied to us in 2nd grade health class, we don't have 5 senses, we have more than that, but our proprioceptive sense is a sense of space, our sense of where we are in the space we're in. Only on the autism spectrum, we are typically clumsy at that. I think if I fall one more time, I get my frequent fallers club card punched all the way, and I get a free ER visit. It's bad. I can't believe I haven't tripped over like a podium or something at a presentation because I don't know where I am. Which means if you have a person that has those same challenges, if they're banging up against a wall, they know exactly where they are. They have that wall to register. With those type of behaviors, unless it's going to hurt themselves or somebody else, it's best to let it continue. Now, to give you an example of that where the behavior had to be stopped, there was a high school student in St. Louis, and it was really confusing for the school because this was a straight A student. And yet, every day around noon, he would act up to the point that the SRO would have to come and tackle him. Well, they didn't understand what was going on because this person had not had any behaviors, and now all of a sudden he is acting up to where the school police officer would have to come and tackle him. Well, eventually the school came to the conclusion that, well, he just wanted the police officer's attention. So they stopped sending the officer. The behaviors escalated. When the person with autism realized that nobody was coming, he then ran out of the school and started running in traffic, doing the slalom in between cars, and this required St. Louis County officers to come and tackle him. Well, the school was still under the impression this person just liked police officers. Well, then they hired the agency I worked for and went, well, here's the thing. The behavior happened every day in the 12 o'clock hour. He was taking on different classes. It was something that finally challenged him. He was getting overloaded. That pressure of being tackled is what he wanted. It wasn't about the officer. It was that pressure was a calming mechanism. So the school invested in about one of Temple Grandin's squeeze machines, which Temple Grandin, probably the most famous person with autism, she got through college by making a squeeze machine, noticing that cattle in a chute instantly become docile. School got that. They gave him the ability to use that in that 12 o'clock hour when he just got overloaded, and all those behaviors vanished. So in that situation, when the school finally went, okay, what is the root cause of the behavior? When they found it, they were able to fix it. Have difficulty interacting with others? This is where I embarrass myself because I'm the person that I will use for this. We with Asperger's are experts at saying the absolute wrong thing at the absolute wrong time. And in a university setting, this can probably be just a hidden minefield for a person on the spectrum, especially with these two stories I'm about to tell. I had a girlfriend for many years in the early 2000s. We bowled on the same bowling team. And one Monday evening, she came in with an outfit that was different. I can describe it one of two different ways. She was either trying to emulate a walking tent, or she just got done with a Star Wars audition, some weird alien from some planet nobody's ever heard of. It was that far out there. I've been all around the world. I have not seen anything remotely close to it since, thank goodness. But that evening, other people looked at her oddly, but when I saw her, I asked the first thing that came to my mind. What is that? No anger in my words, no malice. It was a really innocent question. I just wanted to know what planet her clothes came from. That's all. She didn't take too kindly to that, and I had no idea. I had no idea she was upset. I had no idea she was angry, and I had no idea she was giving me the look. The look that the next two words out of my mouth, best be I'm sorry. I had no idea. 10-minute practice period before league came and went. She still didn't have her bowling shoes on yet. It became her turn to bowl, and I, being the rule stickler, another thing about us on the autism spectrum, we will be the first one to let you know that you're doing something wrong. Even if you're an authoritative figure, we mean no disrespect, it's just that rules are meant to be followed. So, which means in this story, when it's your turn to bowl, you best be bowling. So I turned to her politely. She's expecting an apology, and I proudly state, you're up. And that made her more mad, and she didn't talk to me for several weeks. Same girlfriend, 6 months later, things are smoothed out. I got my Asperger diagnosis. And the information on the internet back then, and unfortunately there's still people on YouTube and other various mediums that still proclaim this type of information, but my doctor didn't know what it was. He sent me to go get an assessment. He read the assessment a few weeks later and went, yep, yeah, no doubt about it, you have Asperger's. Good luck. Good luck, yes, thank you, that tells me a lot. If you're like me and you're given a diagnosis and you've never heard of it, there's only one place to go, the all-knowing internet. First website I came across in December 2003 made a bold proclamation that all people with Asperger's, all people with autism will never have a job, will never have friends, will never be happy. Unfortunately, I believe those words. And in life, autism spectrum or not, in life, if you believe no, don'ts, and can'ts, that's exactly what's going to happen. And that's what happened to me. I pushed everybody in my life away. I didn't care about any person, any place, anything. And if I could have disappeared, if I could have vanished, I would have been okay with that. Unfortunately, at the same time, my girlfriend got that same sort of bad information. So she started backing away from me slowly. So I had to figure out if she still liked me. Now, most people could probably call, meet up, and say, hey, are we still good? Everything okay? Myself, oh no, I couldn't do that. That involved talking about emotions. So I had to get creative, had to get crafty, and I came up with this great idea. In my mind, this was a win-win-win-win situation. Nothing bad could come from this. So, to see if she still liked me, I decided I had to break up with her. And I did so on Christmas. And I did so via text message. And that was back on phones where you had to press a button 3 or 4 times on each one to get the letter. Yeah, that was dedication there. But in my mind, and the trap I fell into that night was I was being logical in an emotional world. We on the autism spectrum may have no idea the emotional ramifications of the words we state. I just thought she would call and protest and everything would be fine. I couldn't see that if she liked me before the text, maybe she won it after. End result, I've only talked to her twice since Christmas 2003. Now, take that for a student on campus that's on the autism spectrum that's going to have no idea the emotional ramifications. We are experts about talking about subjects that maybe shouldn't be talking about. If there's a national tragedy, we will be seemingly cold, callous, heartless about it, having no idea people may feel energetic about it or sad. We may not realize that. We may not pick up on signals that the topic we're talking about, whether it's politics or whatever policy, that the other person doesn't agree with us. We may keep badgering them because, going back to the I think therefore you should know, since I believe it, everybody else should have the exact same belief I do. So I know many students across the country I've come across that have had issues with that because they just don't know, so to speak, drop it. They don't pick up on those signs that the person doesn't want to hear, that they don't agree with it. And it's okay to have disagreements. The person on the autism spectrum, though, may take that argument to the next level and just keep going, not realizing that might not be the place, that may not be the time. Avoidance of touch, common. That CIT story in North County, great example, that tap on the shoulder. Sustain unusual repetitive actions. This is another thing that 8 hours of random stories that go nowhere could happen. Many presenters that are not on the autism spectrum have a sustained unusual repetitive action. Myself, twirling clicker, people not on the autism spectrum, and everybody's going to have their sensory needs somewhat. If you're in a boring class, you might just tap your pen or twirl the pen, something. Everybody's going to have that to a certain degree. We with autism will take it to the next level, and whatever it may be, unless it's going to hurt themselves or somebody else, it's best to let it continue because that may be our coping mechanism. Inappropriate laughing or giggling. You may tell a person the most important question or command of their life, and their response to you is, they may laugh at you. One of 2 things could be going on. 1, preferring to be alone. They've learned. Laugh, people go away. Secondly, they may not be actually laughing as in humor. Some individuals actually process the information they hear by laughing. So don't take that laughing as a sign of disrespect or a sign that they're trying to minimize the situation. It could be one of those 2 things going on. Inappropriate attachment to objects. In terms of a housing environment, this is very crucial to understand because, what to you could be inanimate, to us may mean the world. And that phrase, inappropriate attachment to objects, taken right out of the DSM-4. And I have to admit, I started to take offense to that term, inappropriate, because for me, it makes perfect sense. And what I mean by that, I have a videographic memory. It's like having a DVD library of everything that's ever happened, except when it comes to people. When it comes to people, they are blurred out. I don't remember them. That doesn't mean I don't remember their existence. It's just that I can't remember the physical appearance. That girlfriend I had for many years in the early 2000s, I can't tell you much about her, except I think she might have been somewhat on the short side. Maybe. Don't really know. Because of that, I have to remember people through other means. Be it days of the year, certain numbers, certain words, certain food, certain smells, but the number one way I remember a person is through physical items. And when I was 12, I had a friend stay at my house all night. Now, this was a rare occurrence. When I was 12, friend really wasn't in my vocabulary. I didn't have many friends. I didn't have many friends stay the night. This was a big deal. And over the course of the evening, he'd drink a Minute Maid orange soda, and when he was done, he placed it on my dresser. Very quickly, that soda can became more than a soda can to me. It was my connection to my friend. I could almost visually see him in my memories through that soda can. So that soda can stayed there a while. A couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months, then 6 months, 1 year, 3 years. 5 years later, I went to a race car driving school in Las Vegas. And while I was gone for that week, my mom thought she would do me this really big favor and clean my room. First thing I noticed when I got home wasn't that I could see the floor for the first time in half a year. Remember, some people on the spectrum may be OCD when it comes to cleaning, and then you had me. I'm not. First thing I noticed wasn't that I could see the floor. First thing I noticed was that soda can, which meant so much to me, gone. Tossed out like a piece of trash. And in my mom's defense, that's exactly what it was. How could she have known that can meant anything? End result, I cried more over the loss of that soda can than I would over the eventual loss of my 2 cats and dog, and they all lived to be over the age of 16 and were my only friends for many years, but they weren't a person. That soda can was my connection to a person, and poof, gone, deleted from history. For another person on the spectrum, in their housing environment, on their person, what have you, there may be these hidden minefields of an item that may remind them of a deceased parent, or maybe their siblings back home, or their favorite teacher, what have you. And if they see it moved in any way, whether another student touches it, staff, or what have you, if they see that item moved, there may be a severe behavior immediately, because for them, it means the world. To you, there's going to be no way you're going to know. And if they see that item mishandled, it's like mishandling, maybe it's their final memory of a friend that they no longer know, or a relation, whatever it may be. But if that item is moved, it can be a big behavior. And because of I think, therefore you should know, they're going to have no comprehension that you don't understand what the item represents. Spinning and twirling objects and exhibit finger, arm, or wrist flickering. A lot of us on the autism spectrum are attracted to things that spin. And when I discovered the game show Wheel of Fortune at the age of 5, I didn't just watch Wheel of Fortune. My dad had to hold me back because I was trying to run into the television, because it was the most sensory, euphoric, awesome, blissful, amazing thing I've ever seen. And to this day, I still think they need to get rid of the contestants, get rid of the puzzles. Just give us 30 minutes of that wheel spinning. That right there would be award-winning television. Let me tell you. Beautiful. It would sweep the Aspies. Anyway, though, twirling objects also extremely common. When I get nervous, this is what I do. I twirl my belt loop. This right here is just sensory heaven. Especially when you twirl it enough that it tears off the bottom and it's only hanging on the top. Words cannot describe the pure joy and the way it gets rid of anxiety just that little bit. I wish I wouldn't have started. Clothes are expensive, but my goodness. Finger arm wrist flickering, also very common. I try not to do this in public. It is a big sign, though, that somebody is on the autism spectrum. And I have to admit, yesterday I went into about a 30-second version of what I do, because I'm on the road now till November 9th. I left St. Louis yesterday. I'm not home till November 9th. I'm essentially going to all corners of the country. One of my most ambitious tours I've ever done. So I was so excited at the airport, even though I was going on 2 hours of sleep, getting excited. So when I get excited and I can't get rid of the emotion, what I do, I'll either burst into something like this or like that. Those type of hand motions, extremely common for us on the autism spectrum. Other individuals may go all the way to their elbows or their entire arms. But for us, or at least for me, that's my way to experience the emotion, start the process of purging the emotion, and get back to a level playing field. If I don't do that, whatever emotion I'm feeling is going to feel like I'm building, and it feels like I'm going to explode. That's my way to get rid of it. Now, the mentality in the autism field 30, 40 years ago was that behavior needs to stop, that's socially inappropriate. Well, as more people in the autism spectrum advocated for themselves and described the reasons why we do it, now it's one of those things. Unless that behavior is going to hurt themselves or somebody else, it's best to let it continue. This can be tricky in a classroom setting, because somebody may have behaviors that create noise, create distractions. And in that, you're going to have to wait, okay, is there any way to maybe redirect that behavior to something else that they can find that is not going to be distracting? I don't have the answer as to what to do on that, but sometimes those behaviors can be distracting. But for the person with autism, that may be their only means that they know at that moment on how to deal with emotions. If verbal may have trouble with correct speech volume, some individuals will talk way too loudly, having no idea they're talking way too loudly, or others may talk too softly, having no idea. Again, it's the I think, therefore you should know mentality. Appears if deaf, cover their ears, look away. Echo words and phrases, clinical term echolalia. This can be very frustrating for law enforcement or teachers that aren't prepared to come across this. Some individuals, one, may never have an independent word in their life. Two, some individuals may have trouble really hearing words. So if you tell a person to get into the car, they may seemingly tell you to get into the car. Well, one of two things could be going on. One, individual may not have an independent word. Secondly, they may not be repeating it back to you. They may be repeating it back to themselves. Get into the car. That's a complicated sentence, going to have to break it down. Get, that means I'm going. Into, that means I'm going into, that is why I'm entering the car. Oh, I need to get into the car. It can take that type of thought process to understand what to you is a seemingly simple command. For them, they may have to break it down that way. Rocking back and forth, also one of the bigger red flags, somebody's on the autism spectrum, whether they're standing in place, rocking back and forth, or in a chair, or just sprawling out on the ground and rocking back and forth. But when there is rocking, perhaps a lot of anxiety, maybe a lot of anger, what have you, unless the rocking's going to hurt themselves or somebody else, best to let it continue. Understanding the individual with autism, and they may inappropriately approach or run towards officers, which it doesn't have to be officers. They may inappropriately approach or run towards anybody. One person that got services where I worked, this 13-year-old loved anybody that was remotely anywhere near overweight. Anytime he saw a person like that, he would just run up to them and hug them. He had no idea that was not something socially appropriate, but he just loved people like that. So that's what he would do. So had no idea that's not appropriate. People will take that as offensive or hostile. A law enforcement story of this teenager in New Jersey. He loved all things law enforcement. If he was going to watch television, it had to do something with police, or he wasn't interested. Thing was, though, he never met an officer. Well, it just so happened on this Saturday, half a block away, a traffic stop was going on. It was going to be the best day of his life. He ran down the steps, ran directly towards the traffic stop, ran directly towards the officer, screaming, fists in the air, and when he got to the officer had just enough time to turn around and perform a quick takedown. And rightfully so. The person with autism had no idea that when you run directly at somebody, screaming with your fist clenched, they are going to take that as a hostile action incoming. Well, that officer was great. He did have to restrain the person with autism. He was way too excited, but he finished the traffic stop. Then he talked to the person with autism, and the person with autism thought it was kind of cool being taken down like that because he saw that maneuver performed on many, many TV shows. So boy, did he have a story to tell. But that person in his excitement had no idea running at somebody like that would be, and rightfully so. But one story I always get, I don't share this story too often, but it always sends shivers down my spine. Well, I present at the CIT trainings at the St. Louis Police Academy. And then when I worked at Eastern Seals Midwest, later that afternoon, the officers would come to one of our sites and interact with people with autism. And this one session, we had this man, he was 6'5", 300 pounds, and he loved to jump. He loved that feeling of the vestibular system and the joints, the pressure. He loved it. He would just jump everywhere he went. Well, there was this one officer, and he was on the shorter side. He was probably 5'3", 5'4", and you could tell that he just didn't want to be there that day. I mean, he was just uncomfortable. Every room we were in, he went to the corner. And on this, during the site visit, when we were in our gymnasium, he went to the corner. And while he was there, this man, 6'5", 300 pounds, who loved to jump, started jumping right at him, getting closer and closer and closer. The officer reached down and realized he didn't have what he thought he had. He was visibly shaken. Officers don't like to be cornered. They really don't like to be cornered when a 6'5", 300 pound man was coming to him, and the person jumped, kept jumping, got to about 6 inches from him, jumped for about 30 seconds, and then turned around and jumped away. In our debrief session afterwards, that officer just broke down and started crying. and said, had I not had your training earlier today, had this just happened in the field, I would have tased him or shot him. I would have thought he was coming to crush me. People with autism may not understand their size. They may not understand that their actions are going to make those around them nervous. And thankfully, that officer had training and that day, and that didn't happen. Had that happened a week later without that training, may have been one of those unfortunate situations in the news. In emergencies, they may flow against medical procedures. And people not on the autism may do that, but they may attempt to re-enter dangerous environments. I presented at a conference in Oxnard here in 2017, and one of the presenters was talking about campus safety on one of the unfortunate shootings that happened at one of the universities here in the area. But the primary gist of his thing was that law enforcement agencies need to be able to communicate with each other because 35 different agencies descended upon this university and none of them could contact each other, so the officers were essentially chasing each other, not knowing who was who. But the one thing I took away from it was they played this news clip. You have 1,000 students running that way, and there is one student, she is trying to get to class. She's not picking up on the social cues that when you have people running and screaming, odds are there's a danger that way. She didn't pick up on it, and the news interviewed her, and I'm not a doctor, I can't give a diagnosis, but this was a clear-cut case of Asperger's because the reporter asked, so why were you going against everybody? Where were you trying to go? Well, the text on my phone just said that avoid an area, and my class started in 5 minutes, and I was with all the people, it was really hard, so I had to go around another way to try to get to my class. I was just trying to get to class. She didn't pick up on, with what was going on, missing class would be okay. For students that are on the autism spectrum, those provisions of exceptions to rules, may want to have a plan, may want to have a set, I know every place has a different thing, but in terms of when routines are changed, the person with autism may try to go and continue it regardless of what is going on around them. One of my former coworkers, her husband's a firefighter, and in the past 3 years, on 2 different house fires, he's had to rescue the same person from a house fire twice. That is very frustrating for a firefighter. You save somebody, and then you have to save that person again from the same fire. But here's the thing, it's 3 in the morning. They're outside, which one, their parents have never let them outside past 8 or so. Secondly, they're outside in their pajamas. The rules say they need to be asleep at that time. So they will go back to bed. They will try to go back into the house, go back into the dangerous environment, having no idea that environment is not one to be around in. Which brings us to the next thing, maybe come up with changes in routine. In a university setting, I am sure students on the spectrum, if you're in any administrative role, if there is a change in routine, a person with Asperger's may protest, may throw a fit because we are routine oriented. If something happens one way one time, it needs to continue to happen. So when there is a change, if there is a substitute, what have you, we will be the first one to tell you you're doing it wrong, that's not the way it's supposed to be, and we may get hung up on it. We may go on and on and on because another one of my sayings, whatever happens first always has to happen, and we will protest in those changes. We may not understand your uniform or work vehicle, understand what is expected of them. Big thing here, this story is police related, but the essence, the soul of the story, if you interact with somebody with autism, you are probably going to have a story like this. Might not have the same end result, but the frustration, the confusion is going to be there. 5 years ago, this week in St. Louis, an 18-year-old with Asperger's got pulled over. This was a straight A student, genius level IQ. Officer comes, taps on the window. We're not good at picking up on nonverbal social cues. Unless it's concretely stated, it may go 26.5 miles over our head. So officer taps. The person with Asperger's looks at the officer inquisitively, waited for directions, none came. So I looked through the windshield. Oh, that made the officer none too happy, so the officer pounds the glass really hard. This annoys the person with Asperger's. He looks at the officer and goes, "What?" And looks forward again. Oh, now the officer absolutely irate. And rightfully so. He's assuming this person's being a jerk just for the sake of being a jerk. He pounds the glass and says, "Sir, roll down your window, now!" Person did so, and he very calmly asked the officer, "Oh, why didn't you say so in the first place?" Story goes downhill from there. The officer then asked the unfortunate worded question of, "Sir, can I see your license?" Person with Asperger's thought about it for a moment and said, "No." Then in the most stern, matter-of-fact, I mean business voice possible, the officer said, "Sir, can I see your license now?" Person with Asperger's now, he's taking longer and harder, trying to figure out what type of trick question this was. And he laughed when he got his answer and said, "No, you still can't see my license." Well, he was immediately arrested for disobeying the orders of an officer and obstruction of a peace officer's duty, taken to the station where, thank goodness, the officers there had autism training. They were able to read between the lines. They realized this individual wasn't intentionally trying to be obstinate, defiant, non-compliant, or any of those other really cool, awesomely long words. Bottom line, he wasn't out to make the officer's life miserable, so no charges were filed. Mom got her son, and she said, "Son, why didn't you help the officer?" Well, that 18-year-old was just as confused then as he was at the beginning of this whole debacle, and he said, "But Mom, I was trying to help the officer. He kept asking if he could see my license. How could he? It was in my wallet." When interacting with somebody on the spectrum, be mindful you may be dealing with somebody that has an absolute literal interpretation of everything. Can I see your license? There are two answers to that. Yes or no. Even though most people are going to understand that's a statement, that's a command, if you take it as a question, it's yes or no. There's no implications that the wallet needs to come out, needs to be opened up, license needs to be found, and handed to the person. So, in a university setting, especially socializing sarcasm, if a person asks another person if they want to do something later, and the person goes, "Oh yeah, we'll do that," in the mind of the person with autism, if they don't pick up on sarcasm, they agreed to do so, which could lead to a social feud. May not understand your verbal commands or use of slang expressions. It's best just to avoid slang figures of speech. Just go through the rest of your day this afternoon and hear how many non-literal statements you use and you hear, and you perfectly understand it. But think for a person on the spectrum that takes everything at literal value, just how confusing navigating every single day can be. And whatever may cause it, sensory overload may cause fly from light, sirens, cam partners, aromas. Big thing here, if it is a sensory episode, and you do know it's a sensory episode, so often people want to console the person, it's okay, something like that, but in those things, what normally would be a nice comforting touch may feel like a knife stab. In situations, talk calmly and softly, that's easy. Big thing though, whether it's crisis situation or not, you want to speak in direct short phrases such as "stand up now" or "go to the car," and you want to do that for the same reason why you want to allow for delayed responses to your questions or commands. I myself at times have this auditory processing delay. We may only hear the second half of a sentence. So if somebody's running away from you and you say "stop running," if they hear the second half of that sentence, they're going to continue to do what it is that you told them to do. So with the spectrum, you want to tell them what they should be doing. It's really hard to rewire your brain to say, instead of "stop running," because we do live in a no, don't stop. Try to say "start walking." Tell them what they should be doing so there's no way they can misconstrue what it is. When talking to somebody, be prepared. It may take 5, 6, 7 seconds by the time you ask a question and get a response. In a classroom setting, that can be frustrating because, teachers may want the answer now. For us with autism, though, may take a while to process. In those situations, consider repeating or rephrasing. If you get past that 7, 8, 9 second threshold, if you repeat it word for word. If you rephrase it, try to use the same words, but take unnecessary words out. And consider use of pictures, written phrases, and commands in sign language. All that works great, but it is amazing the stuff that technology can do now. 50 years ago, the mentality was that people that are nonverbal will never be able to communicate. Now there's apps that can do everything up there like that and more. So I think we're going to continue to see more and more of that. Use slow gestures for attention. One thing I do want to say, should you know of anybody that ever wanders off, which is common for people on the spectrum, whatever field you may go into someday. Some people may wander off, and when I do a presentation for a town, maybe their entire police force, I say, it is awesome I'm here today. But if you have a person that wanders 50 miles away from home, and that town 50 miles away has no understanding of autism, let's take that man that liked to jump. The officer now knows if he meets him on the street, that person means no ill will. That person jumps 50 miles away, goes to a town that has no autism understanding, something bad could happen. If you ever hear something like that, suggest something like that. I know there's grants through the Department of Justice where families can get access to that for free. It is relatively inexpensive, but whether it's a tag on a shoelace, a bracelet, a necklace, something. And I heard one officer at Quantico told me, and right now it's a small outfit in Minnesota, but it's a medical alert bracelet, but it's also a transmitter. So for certain towns, some towns have it, but if an officer comes within 100 feet of them, they get an alert on their phone that lets them know that they're in close proximity. So if there is a person alone in the woods, well, their phone will alert them of what they have and whatnot. Other thing is predict for them, give the pre-instructions. Change is hard for us, and if we know if something's going to happen in advance, that is good. I have mentioned the most important statements as I've been presenting, so if there's 5 takeaways, here's the 5. Coming in at number 5 is living life on the autism spectrum is like living life unfiltered. Now this can go with emotions, be it when we experience emotions, which there are misguided experts that say we have no emotions, have no empathy, and simply don't care. No, we have all the emotions in the world. It's just that those emotions from like on a scale of 10, 1 through 8 just really don't register. We may not experience it, or we may not know that we're experiencing it at all. So when we do experience emotion, we are at a 10. Nobody can handle emotions at a 10, so you're going to get a behavior. That unfiltered may also go with sensory things as well. We may not have the ability to tune out that background noise. Number 4 is whatever happens first always has to happen. In my book, I compare it to a camera that uses film, which I gotta say, if you ever present to a middle school, do not mention a camera that uses film. They will look at you like you're speaking Martian or something, and they will not hear another word you have to say. But imagine a camera that uses film, takes a picture, prints the film, puts it in a portfolio, and anytime that situation is duplicated, we on the spectrum, we already know what's going to happen because we have this film in the portfolio to tell us what's going to happen. So when there is a change, you may get a behavior. Number 3 is I think, therefore you should know. As I said, in a university setting, this is probably going to be one of the most frustrating and the thing that probably gets a ASPE in trouble the most, just because there's going to be no comprehension of, and they may do something, they may be trying to help out, and their intentions really might be good at heart. The way it plays out in society might not be, or might be deemed maybe almost stalkerish, or many different things, many different scenarios can come from that. Number 2, being logical in an emotional world. As I said, seemingly cold, callous, heartless statements, having no idea the emotional ramifications. If it's factual, there shouldn't be emotions. That's the way a person on the spectrum may think. And number 1, I began with it, I will end it with it. If you've met one person with autism, you've only met one person with autism. So the stories I've given, next person could be the opposite. And if you come across, over 20 years, if you come across 9 people on the spectrum and tactic A works, don't assume that 10th person, that same tactic is going to be effective. Always be willing to adjust because each person's going to be different. I do have time for questions. I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time, and I have many more stories that don't fit into the flow of that. But any stories I covered or didn't cover? Wait, did I say story? Any questions? Any stories I covered or didn't? Any questions? Oh man, butchered that. So I know nobody ever likes asking. Oh, we have a first question.
You talked about eye contact. I'm curious, like, what your preference is, or if you could speak from your expertise when you're talking to someone. Do you prefer for them to not look at you to relieve you from that, or to, like, when they're talking to you or when you're talking to them, do you prefer for them to avoid eye contact as well, or to maintain?
Oh, I wish my dad could hear that question right now. Because, so here's the thing. A lot of things with autism, unfortunately, are a one-way street. So when I'm having a conversation with my dad, so to speak, you know, I'm sort of like talking to this right now, but if you were to turn your head and I'm talking, I would just immediately, and then when he looks again, I'll start talking again. So there's that one-way street. Be looking at me when I'm talking to you, but I'm not going to look at you. But if you look away, I'm then going to, and then I'm going to start talking and look away. It's, so my dad, if I talk to him this afternoon, will get a kick out of that because I've been doing that since I was 3. A lot of things can unfortunately be a one-way street, but I have to know that you're listening, and I understand, you know, if you're talking to me, I'm going to try to, I mean, I'm good at faking it, looking over your shoulder, or sort of making eye contact. I'm actually focused on the leaves out there, which I gotta say, this is the best backdrop as a presenter I've ever had. This beats Boise State. I was at Boise State 4 months ago presenting at their football stadium in the suite area in the press box, and in the back were the mountains, but this. Anyway though, focusing on the leaves or the water behind you, and now I'm distracted with scenery. Did I answer the original question? Yes, I'm going to go back in and enjoy the view.
I'm a career counselor here at Pepperdine, and so I work with students on their job search, and so I was wondering if you had any reflections about job searching and the employment world.
Yes, I was hoping for that question because that's something I would have covered in the other presentation but didn't fit into this, but I was sure somebody was going to ask that. So I'm going to plug my book, not intentionally, but the title is Finding Kansas. Has nothing to do with the state, thank goodness. If you ever get the opportunity to drive across that state, I apologize right now. That's 8 hours of your life you can never get back. I've done it 5 times. That state owes me 40 hours of my life. No. I mean, you'll be dreaming of that scenery. I mean, it's 8 hours and nothing. It has nothing to do with that. Instead, it's one of those analogy metaphor types. It's not the real state of Kansas. Instead, if you do hear a doctor or clinician talk about autism, they will tell you that an individual on the spectrum will have an area of defined interest or knowledge that they're going to want to talk about to the exclusion of everything else. That works. That's wordy, though. The way I describe it is, if you were paralyzed in every state except Kansas, where would you want to live? The answer is going to be Kansas. And for us on the autism spectrum, our Kansases or Kansai, I don't know the plural of Kansas, I've been working that out for 8 years, but I gotta say I presented at St. Louis University 7 years ago, and oh, the poor facilitator. So you have 10 people with Asperger's and myself, and when I got hung up on the plural of Kansas, they then got hung up. The facilitator, we had her outnumbered. It was a wasted afternoon though. But we will have an area to find interest or knowledge, whether it's computers or engineering, what have you, employment. If some way, somehow, some possible way, go for that area of interest. The unemployment rate for those with Asperger's is around 85%. Extremely high. If we're not in a thing that we love, motivation is not there. My jobs before I started doing this lasted about 5 or 6 months. Then when I saw at the video game store I worked at, I was the #1 salesperson. Oh, I mean, the way you see me now is the way I sold Game Informer subscriptions at GameStop. I could get you to buy something even if you didn't even play video games. I should have been a car salesman. I would get you all the bells and whistles. But when I saw the futility, and you know, I'm the #1 salesperson, but whether I give 180% or don't try at all, it doesn't matter. When I saw through that, there was no passion. I beat the game. And then I got my diagnosis. I gave up on life then. And giving up, here's the thing, and this is why I believe the unemployment rate can be so high. Let's start in elementary school. A person tries to socialize. Let's use myself in kindergarten. In kindergarten, I tried to communicate with my classmates. Yeah, back in 1988, I had a conversation with a classmate about the threat of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. In kindergarten. It just didn't work out too well. They just wandered off. So I realized people don't listen to me. In 2nd grade, I wanted to talk about low pressure systems and the Gulf moisture and the threat of a tornado watch. Again, people wander away. Thankfully, I wasn't picked on, I wasn't bullied, but you know, let's take another student. Talks about marine biology, so to speak. 1st grade, talking about what a shark can do, talking about sharks in 7th grade, when the social dynamic is changing, getting more complex, and they are still talking just facts, and they may get picked on. They go to high school. Same thing. They may get that first summer job. You know, they're not going to understand the political aspect that a job is more than just doing the work. I didn't understand that. At the video game store, people tried to talk to me, and I took offense to that. How dare you talk to me about this new show called American Idol? Because we're here to work. Why are you disrespecting me by chit-chatting? I didn't understand. They were trying to be my friend. So that is a big thing that we may not pick up on. My jobs got burnt out. I came to the conclusion that every job I would get would end in 5 months. If failure is a guarantee, logically, where is the point in trying? The fail-set mindset is our biggest enemy on the autism spectrum. That, too, if you have a student coming in, that first semester is huge because they may try, and if they realize it's going to be just like high school, it's going to be just like their middle school experience, they're going to try, they're not going to fit in, they're going to get burnt out. One and dones, semester-wise for Aspies, extremely common, leading to that 85%. So whatever their area of expertise is, they're probably going to be better than most at. They're going to maybe talk about it more. And going back to the logical stuff, when they have to do the other classes that have no relevancy to what they want to be, well, you might have to explain it in a logical manner of why they have to do that to allow them the skills to do. I mean, if they want to do marine biology, why are they learning about 18th century history or something? There's going to be a complete they're going to be tunnel focused on that end goal. So helping them achieve whatever their interest is and explaining logically why they have to do the other things could be effective. Again, though, remember number one, if you've met one person, you've only met one person, but the unemployment rate is 85%, and some of those things I mentioned, I believe, are the primary pathway to why that number is so high.
Do you have any tips for managing change in the workplace?
Managing change in the workplace, let them know in advance. That's about the best I can give you. Springing up changes. Now, of course, changes are going to happen. And I mentioned the fail-set mindset is our biggest hindrance. At the same time, though, you can't make a 100% fail-safe environment because everybody's going to have failures. Nobody is going to get through life without a setback or a failure. So you do have to find that balance of making where there is a risk of failure, but if you make a completely safe change environment without ever any changes, well, if they're on campus and they're in that environment, will they have the skills to cope when they do go into the workplace? So, when available, be able to let them know when there is going to be a change. But if a sudden change does happen, somebody doesn't show up, they might have to do different tasks. Explain logically, this is what can happen. This isn't the norm, but you do have to be prepared on those changes. They may then go through a fear phase of every day, and I can envision a person on the spectrum going, well, is that person showing up today? Are they showing up today? I mean, they can get hung up on then trying to predict for themselves the change that may happen. But explaining logically that, your job description may be this, but on certain days if a computer breaks, if this happens, you're going to have to be a little bit flexible. Each person that's going to have to be explained to differently, and if there is a big change, change in management, new employee, giving them a few days notice to prepare, always good. But at the same time, if you make it overly safe, when there is a change that's unforeseen, they may not have the ability. So finding that balance, which I don't have because there is no one answer to that. Each person's going to have a different ability, but I'd go with those.
So for students who are transitioning from high school to college or from college to graduate school, are there typically any accommodations that can be made that would make the transition easier? I mean, it's already going to be a huge change, but in the classroom or with an advisor, is there something that they can do to make that easier on them?
Oh, that one, I'm going to practice being a politician by answering the question without answering the question by saying if you've met one person with autism, you've only met one person with autism, and if you've met one university or high school, you've only met one university or high school. Each place is going to have different levels of accommodation. I've had some schools, I presented at a high school, one of the better areas of St. Louis, so you'd think their staff would be top notch, And when in my teacher presentation, their special education director was there, and I really harp on change is bad. Change is bad. And the person went, so what you're telling me is people with autism don't like change? Oh, that explains so much. I wanted to throw my clicker at them. I mean, they are the director and they didn't. So each place is going to be different. Of course, the smoother the transition, the better. But then at the same point in time, how much is too much? At what point does the person then not going to have the capabilities to go for adjustment? So advisors, helpers, one thing that can be difficult from going to high school, especially parents may, and the difficult thing is with Asperger's, a lot of people are going to be undiagnosed. They may be your straight A students. They may be your valedictorians because, you know, they weren't chit-chatting, they weren't small-talking, they just did their work. So they may not have the diagnosis, but they may have no ability to socialize whatsoever. Those could be the students that you really got to be on the lookout for, those potential candidates for the spectrum, because, you know, they've been in a single building their entire school career, then they come to a place where they have to manage their time. They're living away from home for the first time, and they may not have the skill set to do that, and now they have to be at this building at 10 o'clock, over there at 2 o'clock, but they have no classes on Tuesday, so being able to transition from that, I think people that are on the spectrum that have parents are going to advocate for them, might call a little bit too much on accommodations, but it's those ones that aren't diagnosed that then eventually end up in that 85% because they were thrown into an environment they don't have the skill set to be on. Now, I can't say you can go around saying, oh yeah, you have Asperger's, by the way, but being on the lookout for your campus counselors or whatnot, those students could be the ones that are going to be the one and dones because they really are not prepared to be away from home in that manner. And on paper, they're your perfect student. They're your straight A student. On paper, they're a great example. I had a message from she was from Iceland. She had a dual doctorate. I don't exactly know what she did. It was something in the oil business and geology, making close to 7 figures a year. But she ended up broke. She could not handle, one, living away from her country. She was a very good in the academics, but in the workplace, she came off as brash, didn't understand humor, and ended up without the ability to even get back to her home. That can happen. So that's an extreme case, but if the social skills aren't taught, which there is no grade for that, so that can be a hidden image, those one and dones can happen.
That's helpful.
And we have time for one more.
Anybody want the final question?
I was just wondering, as a student advisor, would most students be aware of their own triggers, do you think? Or some might know some, but then others could just,
Some might know, and the real tricky thing here is it depends on what, one, their self-awareness is, two, what their introduction to the spectrum was. Some will proudly call themselves an Aspie. Others may hear the word autistic and take offense to it. They may wear that name as a badge of shame. So you may have on paper that they're on the spectrum, and you talk to them and they'll deny it because they will see it as a bad thing. They will see it that they're different, that they're not normal. Although there is no such thing as normal. If we find that one normal person on this planet, congratulations, we have found the most boring individual in the world. That's my definition of normal, but it really depends on the person and their comfort level on expressing that. Before I start presenting, I wouldn't tell you I had sensory issues. I would do behaviors. In second grade, Thursday was fire drill day. I didn't know it was always on a Thursday. So I didn't tell anybody that sound hurt me. Instead, I just became seriously sick every Thursday and did everything I could to avoid school, including putting the thermometer in coffee to show my dad I had a fever. That worked until I showed him of a fever of 107.7, then that trick no longer worked. But it depends on the person and how willing, how comfortable they are on opening up. So one thing, if you talk about their Kansas, be prepared. They may talk about an hour, especially if their Kansas might be statistics of the 1907 baseball season. But if you talk about their interest, and you build that rapport, you may get a little bit more confidence in them telling you their weaknesses, because we're very private people. Except when we're not, then we're overly open. But primarily we're going to be private, but depends on the person. Thanks for having me. Such an honor to present here. Great honor. Thank you.